The first question that I'd like to start off with is, have you lived all your life in Canada?
No, actually. I was born in Canada, born in Fort William, Ontario, which is now part of Thunder Bay. And then I was an exchange student in Finland for a year at the end of the 1980s, 88, 89. And I lived a total of about 3 years in Hungary in the 90s. And then we lived for 5 years in California.
Nice.
Till 2013.
Okay. So, you gave me all of these events that you are significant to Canada and that you have lived through. And what I was wondering is, which one of these events do you feel has affected you the most, like personally?
Well, the first one would be there's two, I guess. They all affected me, but the Olympics, the Montreal Olympics in 1976. So I remember that being in my grandma's basement watching those. And I was about 6 years old, and it was my first real awareness of being part of a nation, being Canadian, watching those Olympics. The second one was maybe the Montreal massacre at the École Polytechnique, and 14 women were killed. Right, they're separated. The men and the women were separated, and Marc Lepine killed the women, and it just was eye-opening for me that sort of. I was in first year university and just realized that my life as a male is different than a woman's experience, for sure.
Okay.
And that we should start listening very seriously to the voices of feminists. So it really made me aware in a way that I had never been aware before, that female experiences are different than male experiences.
Okay.
And I realized I had to pursue that. Yeah.
That's a good answer.
To understand it better.
Yeah. So, another question that I wanted to ask you is, did any of these events change the way you view Canada?
I suppose they all did. And my view of Canada, or my understanding of Canada and being Canadian is always shifting. One was the Canada Act in the early 80s, when Canada effectively, and from a constitutional point of view, became independent from Great Britain. Because up until that point, all our constitutional laws, we didn't have a constitution of our own, so it was the patriation of the Constitution, so any major changes had to be approved by British Parliament. And so I was kind of it changed my view. Like I realized at that point, it was 1980, so I was 10, 11 years old, and I was like, wait a minute, we're not independent?
Yeah.
Or was it 1982? You have the timeline. And it was, realized that we were part of a colonial system. So it forced me to really understand Canada as part of a colonial project in the Americas. And it's something I'm still working on to understand better today. The other one was the referendum in 1995. Because I have a memory of the very first referendum in 1980. So it was the second referendum for Quebec independence, and I realized a few things, because I'd lived overseas at that point, about 4 years total, in Hungary and Finland. I'd started questioning things that I'd never questioned before about Canadian identity or Canadian nationalism. I never realized that I was part of a system that was patriotic and all this, and doesn't ask us to question our nation. So the referendum really forced me to consider the essence of Canadian nationalism and Quebec nationalism, and the desire to separate. And I was, on many levels, very, very sympathetic to the Québécois, right, and the separatist movement. But then it forced me to realize that when Jacques Parizeau gave the speech when they were defeated, and he says, well, it was just the Anglos and the foreigners, and then I realized, well, all nationalisms are tainted with racism and so forth, so maybe even Canadian nationalism. Anyway, so it forced me to reconsider the essence of Canadian nationalism. I also realized that I like Canada with Quebec in it. I don't want Quebec to go. That's very selfish on my part, but they're, in my mind, one of the sexiest parts of Canada.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so to wrap up this interview, my last question is, so you teach history to university students, and I was just wondering, if you were a Canadian historian, which you are not, which Canadian historical event would you feel would be good to teach history students?
Well, because I teach world history, so I think we can bring Canadian stories into world history. I think it would definitely be when Canada joined the coalition of the willing in the invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, in October or fall 2001, after the September 11th attacks. Canada became an active member of a war on terror. It fundamentally shifted our role in the world, a post-war role, from one of peacekeeper to one of an active combatant. It would be a really great way to bring Canadians into, like, to bring Canadian students into a discussion of world events and you know, question like terrorism. Why we're fighting a war against terror in Afghanistan? Who, you know, we're part of an invading force. Who put the Taliban in power in the first place, right? When you start digging deeper, it was the Americans. It was part of a coalition that we were part of. So, you know, there's a bit of hypocrisy. You can dig deep into, question notions of terrorism, and then Canada's role in the world and its changing role in the world. So I think it was it'd be a very, very, very good topic to bring into a university level class.
Interesting. So, yeah, thank you for sitting down with me. This has been a really, really interesting interview. I liked what you had to say. So,
thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for considering me for your history project.
Yes.